So I've been entrusted with giving a talk on how we can improve the startup ecosystem in Namibia. So let's get into it. Just to give a brief background on myself, as you've heard, my name is Etuna Hango. I'm a UCT graduate. I studied finance there, enrolled in 2015. I did some holiday work in 2016, or from 2016 to 2018 with RMB Namibia. They signed me as a second year student as a on a bursary. In 2017, exciting stuff happened. My friends and I founded Foster Digital Education, which is essentially an online learning startup, and also does work in information and communications and digital marketing. 2018, my final year as a student at UCT, I joined what is called Papamaseri, which is essentially a student-run organization that was tasked with going into the townships of Cape Town, specifically Kailicha and Langa, and providing consulting services and support to SMEs there. So yeah, that was a very, very interesting year and a very, very insightful, both from an entrepreneurial perspective and just from understanding the challenges small businesses face in a similar socioeconomic setting. Last year, 2019, founded my second startup with another friend called Cafe Nicolas, which does work in catering and events, and currently I'm a private equity analyst with Eos Capital. Private equity, for those who don't know, is essentially what we do is we find businesses, we buy them, invest into the businesses that are struggling, that need cash flow, businesses that need to grow, businesses with owners who are looking to exit, who feel like they've made their money and want to cash out. We look for those, and if it makes sense, we make the investment and carry the business on. Before I get into it, I would like to make a very important distinction between a startup and an SME. So, startups are new businesses. SMEs, as the name suggests, is a small and medium enterprise. Usually SMEs don't grow beyond a certain size. So think of your local printing shop. The local printing shop is providing a solution to that area. So if you live in Pioneers Park, or a better example, let's say UNAM, and there's no printing shop on that campus, someone could open a printing shop. That's going to be an SME because it's not going to grow outside of UNAM's boundaries. When you think a startup, you think innovation, you think unique, you think disruptive. And one of my favorite examples is Airbnb. So in the year 2007, Joe Gebbia and Brian Chesky were short on some cash. And they thought of this idea where they could basically get these inflatable mattresses and rent out their San Francisco apartment, because they were short on rent and there was a conference happening and all hotels were fully booked. So these mattresses are called air mattresses. So they call this air bed and breakfast. And that's how Airbnb came to be. If you look at the second point I have there, they were really struggling. Gebbia wrote Chesky an email saying, what if they made their loft into a designer's bed and breakfast, complete with sleeping mat and breakfast? It was a way to make a few bucks. 4 years later, they were in over 89 countries, if I understand correctly. Yes, 89 countries that had over 1 million nights booked. And that is a startup. New idea, very disruptive. Hotels have lost a lot of business to Airbnb because they found a niche within the hospitality sector. They found that there is accommodation. You don't have to stay at a hotel. People have houses, people have spare rooms, people have apartments that are vacant. And they then met a unique need, and they scaled incredibly quickly. Today, Airbnb is worth over 30 billion US dollars. They plan to list this year, but COVID happened, and that couldn't happen. And for perspective, their value is a lot larger than the Hilton Hotel, which has been around for many more years. So, why are startups important? As Cons mentioned when he started, he said that private enterprise is very, very integral to a nation's economy. It takes a lot of pressure off government. Currently in Namibia, government's our largest employer, and that shouldn't be the case. Government's job, as Cons mentioned, is essentially to provide our basic needs, healthcare, education, housing, etc., and create an environment in which private enterprise can then survive and thrive. So to have sustainable economic growth and transformation because of our socioeconomics in Namibia, if you look at our private enterprises, the most successful and the biggest, they're all, per se, imported. If you look in your financial sectors, you have your FNB, Sanlam's, Standard Banks. Not to say it's a bad thing, but a lot of our big businesses are imported. If you look at the construction companies right now, you have a lot of Chinese companies. If you look into mining, you have Australians and Canadians, etc. And as I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but what that does is that we don't truly reap the full benefits of our economic resources. Because what happens is profits are then exported, right? So you have companies, yes, they create jobs, they boost economic growth, but it could be better if the enterprises were housed here. And that can only happen if we create an ecosystem that allows Namibians to found businesses and have those businesses survive and thrive within our economy. So, speaking of the startup ecosystem, academically, I mean, there's arguably a lot more elements to the startup ecosystem that aren't included on that graphic, but it largely is comprised of your talent pool, which is your entrepreneurs. So the people with the ideas, the people with the skills, the people with the drive. And then you have your education system, which is both your formal education system and also your social education system. So the stuff the kids learn from their parents at home, from their communities, etc. You have locations and events, which refers to stuff like this. So we're at an event at a location, and it essentially facilitates discussions like this, which then improve or lead to the improvement of the ecosystem. You have mentorship, which essentially just refers to having people who, with some gray hair. You do need some gray hair sometimes, because not everything can be learned from a book. Some wisdom, or a lot of wisdom comes with age. So you have all the people who've been in the game for longer, who can then guide the younger entrants. And then you have incubation and acceleration, which is essentially just another form of support for startups, and then you have funding. So just to get deeper into it, so I'm going to start on education. The current education system in Namibia, both formal and social, does not encourage for entrepreneurship. Going to school, we're taught, go be a doctor, go be a lawyer, go be an engineer, go be an accountant. But it's very seldom where you find a community within Namibia that essentially and strongly encourages entrepreneurship. So already from an early age, you have people who are probably entrepreneurial I would say by nature, but are then discouraged. So they don't even get to the ideation stage. I can't say many entrepreneurs don't make it past the ideation stage. I say more don't even make it to the ideation stage, which is a problem because if you look at statistics, 90% of startups fail. So if you want 10 successful startups, you need 100 people trying to start something, statistically speaking. And that's not happening in our country. In order to do that, we'll need to have a lot of reform within our education system and provide support within the formal education system for people who are entrepreneurial, give them, basically give avail programs that allow them to harness these skills and desires of theirs and ideas of theirs and make something of them. There's this really cool thing that they do at UCT, In my final year, I did a course called Strategic Thinking. And they try to get you to think out of the box in that course. And there are two ways you can do it. One is the academic route where you learn all the theory, you write the essays, etc., you write the tests, and you write your exam. But alternatively, what they then introduced, I think the year after I left, is that they created a program that essentially, academically, if you had an idea, you could pitch it to them, and if they thought it was good enough, that would then be your coursework. So you working on your business would then be your coursework, and you'd be graded on that. And if you met all your milestones and delivered on them, and more promise was seen in your idea, with the following year, you were then taken into incubation, where they provided some seed funding and so forth. So looking into things like that, just to encourage entrepreneurial people to actually pursue entrepreneurship as a career. On to the next one. So, a startup. So we said that the first stage is to actually get into ideation. So people who then get into ideation, I mean, we've made a lot of progress in the past few years in seed funding, but we still have a lot of shortfalls because there's very, very little seed funding available in the country. And seed funding, as the slide says, is essentially the first official equity. Equity is just, or basically, just think of it as the first money a startup gets to essentially turn idea into an actual tangible concept. And many entrepreneurs in Namibia don't make it past the ideation space due to the lack of resources. Doing research and preparing this presentation, I think the most interesting solution I found to this was in China. What they did was they created a tax incentive for corporations and individuals who invested in startups at their seed in early stages. So if I'm a wealthy person and I have some money sitting around, instead of paying a hefty tax bill on all my earnings, I could rather invest that in a startup. And we all know it. Wealthy people all over the world enjoy avoiding tax. So it would create a really good incentive and provide, yes, an unfortunate reality, but it would create a good incentive, and at least the money would be going to good use. So it would be going into funding and financing startups in their seed stages, and in the long term, would see the economic benefits of it, rather than them shipping the money off to Mauritius. Okay, and then another thing that startups struggle with is that once they have the money, it's very difficult to manage it. I remember when we started Foster, we pitched at a competition. I think it was an NBI competition. We won 70 grand. And I think we used it quite well, but I still believe that we could have used it a little bit better. I still have this debate with my partner. He thinks it was necessary that we wasted the money. I feel like some mistakes don't need to happen as a startup. I mean, many mistakes aren't unique. I'm sure people before me have misused their first round of funding, etc. And a study conducted by Fractal shows that 30% of startups that closed. So this is of all the startups that closed, and I think they surveyed about 1,000 startups or founders in America. 30% of them that closed because they ran out of money, and these were guys that got money. So yeah, I think a solution for this is really just to have to avail support to startups, to have sort of mentorship programs, because as I said, many problems that I believe startups encounter, especially in our context, aren't unique. They aren't novel. It's stuff people have gone through already, and with the right networks, with the right support structures, they can be avoided. And incubators and accelerators are very, very, very good ways to have or to provide these support structures. So the difference between an incubator and accelerator is that an incubator, think of a baby. When a baby is born, baby's put in an incubator. They're nurtured there, and essentially until the baby is okay to leave the hospital, they remain in the incubator, and that's how you should think about it with a startup. It's an idea. When you have an idea, you go to an incubator, and they sort of nurse your idea until your idea is turned into an MVP, what we call a minimum viable product. So they focus on product development, prototyping, customer delivery, discovery, and business planning, etc. And then once you reach your MVP stage, you're then eligible for an accelerator. And an accelerator is tasked with essentially just growing you, speeding your growth up, scaling your business, streamlining your business, your processes, etc. And here we have quite a few. I think Dololo's an incubator, if I understand correctly, or is it both? Speaking under correction. And yeah, so startup support communities are essentially very, very, very important in the success of startups. In the UK, they have a program in which startup founders are, they essentially spend about 1 to 6 months with all the startup founders in the EU, in participating countries. And what this does is that as a new founder, as a new entrepreneur, as someone who's new to the game, you get you learn some lessons from the older players, the more experienced guys. You sit in their businesses. So if you're in the UK, you can go to an Italian guy who has a startup, work with him for 6 months, learn from him, and so forth. And then also, as someone who's been in the game for some time, you then get younger guys bringing you fresh ideas, keeping up with the times, etc. Especially now when things are moving so quickly. With the age of technology and information and so forth, everything's developing so fast. I mean, if you look at how old Facebook is, it's I think 13 years old today, 2007, 2006, 13, 14 years old. If you look at the most valuable companies today, you have Amazon, you have Facebook, you have Google, all tech companies. Things are moving really quickly, and it's really hard to keep up. I'm sure there's going to be stuff that my kids know that I won't know. So it's a really win-win situation for both new and old entrepreneurs. And yeah, I mean, here we have a couple of those. I think we have Startup Namibia, who's part of, I think, one of the hosts of the event. Isa is currently busy with the Angel Business Network of Namibia. I hope I got that one right, and so forth. So we are making strides in the right direction, but again, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to provide the right support to startups. So in Namibia, this one is very personal. This one sits close to home. We have really anti-innovation regulation. I say this because government is one of the largest consumers in the country. And in order to do business with government, everything has to go to tender. And that's not a bad thing, essentially. It's not a bad thing, but it really harms startups, because what happens is that as a startup, as an entrepreneur, my edge is my idea. I propose an idea to whoever, Bank of Namibia, Namibia Statistics Agency, I can give you a long list. And they have to put it to tender. And what's going to happen is that someone with more resources will be able to deliver my idea, arguably, possibly, better to the same quality as I can. And that essentially hinders startups from growing and scaling. So what I thought of, because this is something that it's held us back quite some bit, is that from from the Ministry of Trade's budget allocation is that you could allocate some funds, kind of like what FNB does. FNB has FNB Innovation Works every year, which essentially allows all FNB employees, regardless of what level you work at, to pose an idea that you believe would improve the bank's operational efficiencies or service delivery efficiencies or whatever it might be. And from Innovation Works, eWallet was born and the FNB app was born. So what I'm thinking is have something similar, but at a governmental level. So you avail X amount of funds from the Ministry of Trade's budget, and you say that this is for innovation projects, right? So you have $5 million available every year, and every year entrepreneurs are allowed to pitch an idea that they believe would improve government's efficiencies. I mean, roads authorities definitely need some systems. I had an idea of centralizing healthcare databases so that if I move doctors, my doc doesn't have to relearn me, stuff like that. But essentially, avail funds so that entrepreneurs and startups can then pitch their ideas and be protected. Essentially, have procurement protection, which allows them to compete at a mass level. And again, I'm not saying give one startup 1 million because they have a good idea. Rather have it on a performance-based funding thing. So you release X amount of funds until a certain milestone is reached, and you keep on doing that just to ensure that someone just doesn't take your money and disappear, buy a nice car, buy a nice house, and then we have another NHE on our hands. Another thing is that startups in Namibia are regulated the same way big corporations are, which in my mind makes no sense. For me as a startup, if I make 100 grand in profits, I can't be paying 32,000 of that in tax. I actually can't afford it. It would serve my company better and it would serve the country better if I'm allowed to reinvest that money and grow the business. And what you'll find is that many entrepreneurs actually don't take a lot of money from their business because they have this big grand idea. So for us to be regulated in the same ways that your FNBs are regulated, who have all these processes in place. I remember a time we were applying for a grant, and all these ridiculous requests were made. They asked us for audited financials, they asked us for risk management policy, and I'm like, it's so out of touch with reality because no startup is focusing on that. You're trying to get your product right, you're trying to get it to market, and you're trying to streamline that process from product development to your client. All the other internal bureaucratic processes and structures come in later when you're a lot more established. So I think there's a huge disconnect in understanding what startups actually do and what their day-to-day processes look like and what is expected of startups from I think, regulation and bureaucratic perspective. And I mean, if you look at our VAT laws, if we miss a VAT payment and Ministry of Finance comes back 10 years later and says you missed this one VAT payment, they're going to put all the interest on it for all those years and they're going to put a nice big invoice on my table and I'll have to pay it. But I don't think those are things that startups should be worrying about. I think we should rather implementing pro-startup regulation. So in Senegal and Tunisia, they're the first African countries. They have recently imposed startup acts in their countries. So what these startups do is that they provide procurement protection for businesses, they provide tax breaks for businesses, etc. So that it makes it a lot easier to operate as a startup and focus on what you actually need to be focusing on in those early seed and growth stages. And it's sort of anti-regulation. I know that makes sense. So it removes the regulation from startups and gives them more leeway just to focus on the things that they actually need to focus on. In India, you have the startup certificate, which also then allows you tax breaks. It gives businesses up to 3 years of tax breaks of not paying tax, just so that they can essentially have liquidity, they can have money available to reinvest into their business, etc. And again, focus on streamlining their business, the processes, etc. In Estonia, this is a very interesting one actually, is that they have the startup visa. So if you are a non-EU citizen and you either want to work for a startup or you want to start a startup in Estonia, there's a special visa for that. So I can go to Estonia tomorrow, pack my bags, get on a flight, get my COVID test, and go to Estonia, apply for a startup visa, and start a business there. So I think part of this we might not be ready for yet, given the need to actually protect Namibians' interests in the startup space. But we could definitely benefit off importing talent, because I mean, and I mean, no disrespect to us as a nation, but if I had an idea in tech, if I could import someone from Silicon Valley to do me a lot more good, to work for me, help me, develop my product, they have a lot more experience, they probably have a better education system that supports tech development, website development, app development, etc. They understand it better, they have a lot of experience with it. So essentially, we don't have all the skills necessary to grow the startups internally in the country. And to sort of allow startups permission to import special skills to then grow these businesses of theirs could then also provide, or could then also improve rather, the startup ecosystem in Namibia. Yeah, so just to round everything up in my talk is that, so I've essentially identified 5 things or 5 problems within the ecosystem that need to be addressed. And one is education, most importantly, because we all know that startups are a volumes game. The more startups you have, the more people, the more entrepreneurs you have founding startups, the more likely you are to have more successful private enterprises in the future. More jobs, more economic growth, etc. And then how we do that is we encourage entrepreneurship. We need to help my mom's watching this. We need to encourage entrepreneurship, especially from like the household level. I've spoken to way too many people who've had ideas, and very often, I mean, from home, forget everywhere else, there isn't very much support. But yeah, we definitely need to change the way we think about entrepreneurship, and it shouldn't be a fallback. We shouldn't look down on entrepreneurs. They're the people who create. I mean, if no one founded F&B, you wouldn't be able to go work at F&B. You would be, being an accountant means nothing if no one's founding a PwC. Being an engineer means nothing if no one's founding the engineering firm that you're going to work for. So we definitely need more of those. I mean, if you look at our youth unemployment rates now, not even youth, just the national unemployment rates, forget the youth, it's quite dire. And the only way we're going to create more jobs is if we have more people being encouraged to start businesses, and more people actually succeeding in starting these businesses and growing these businesses. Testing, okay. Another thing is the seed funding. We really need to avail money for entrepreneurs. I think from a personal experience, for us it was a blessing in disguise, but there's this thing that happens. You start a business and you have this grand idea, and usually it's not making money. Because usually unique, innovative things don't make money in the beginning. I think Uber to date has still not reported a profit yet. And they're one of the biggest companies. But so because you're so cash strapped, you sort of divert your attention away from what you actually want to do. And you start doing things that bring money in, because you actually need to survive. I mean, if you want to go full-time entrepreneurship, you need money for food, you might need money for rent, and you might just need money to actually develop the business. So you kind of park your idea and you start doing stuff that actually brings money for you to finance your idea. And I think that's a huge inefficiency in the system. Because now you have a startup that could have been something great in 5 years, but now it's probably going to be something great in 10, 15 years. And I think that's a cost to society as a whole. That's a cost to society. So I think we really need to find ways, the solution of having tax incentives for both corporations and individuals to provide startup support, to provide funding, etc., make it tax deductible and so forth. And then, technical support, I think this one, private sector and public sector, they need to come together, pool our resources, our knowledge, and find innovative ways to assist startups. Something I thought of when we're being asked for all the financials and so forth is I was thinking, the King 4, I think we're on King 4. King 4 essentially encourages, almost regulates all companies to essentially allocate a percentage of profits to corporate social investment, right? So if you could, for example, have an accounting firm that says, look, we're going to take on 2 or 3 startups, we're going to do their books for the year, and that's going to be our form of actually investing back into community. Things in solutions like that. They have the resources, they have the employees, they have the know-how, and possibly, if an accounting firm came to me and did my books for free for 5 years, I would probably never leave it. So I think it's a win-win, long-term solution. You have your startup, you give them the technical support they need, etc. But looking at solutions like that to then help entrepreneurs run their businesses more efficiently, spend their funds better, because you don't know you're wasting money until you look at the books. How many of us have looked at the bank statement and then everything just starts adding up? But before that, you're like, I don't know how I got here. But as soon as you look at your bank statement, you're like, oh, that one day I was at news, actually, and then the other weekend I went, and you're like, okay, no, that makes sense. But essentially, having the stuff down on paper, because I can tell you now, the entrepreneur is not going home every day recording transactions. It's probably the last thing on your mind in the early stages. You're just trying to, get the business running, get it going, and so if that support was provided, have consulting services, etc. You have big consulting firms. Almost every startup banks for someone, and if the banks would be like, okay, look, here's a report of your income and outcome, or expenses rather, expenses, and these are some tips that we have for you to optimize your spending. Little things like that. That could then be part of private sector's contribution through corporate social responsibility and investment. Then we have the support communities. We definitely need more functions like this. We need more platforms like Isaiah's, where you have people willing to provide seed funding, angels, and networking opportunities. I think there's a huge disconnect between the generations. We need something to bridge that gap, because like I said, there's a lot of experience and there's a lot of lessons to be learned from gray hair. And likewise, my mom has an iPhone and I don't think she can open it with a fingerprint. So, there's a lot to be learned both ways. There's a lot to be learned on both ways. So I think we really need to now improve and find ways to actually create these communities, create these networks where we have entrepreneurs of all different ages, from all different backgrounds, that can support each other, learn from each other, give each other ideas, and so forth. And then regulation. That Public Procurement Act of 2015 has given me so much grief in my life, and I think we need to find a way around it. And like I said, it was the act. The act was brought forth with good intention. Where a lot of people using their networks in the wrong way for the wrong reasons, for selfish reasons, and it was sort of put there to curb that. However, it has come at the cost of startups. Startups being able to present their ideas, or startups being able to grow themselves, or startups being able to actually do business with one of the largest spenders, if not the largest spender in the country. And yeah, I mean, as mentioned earlier in my presentation, there are numerous ways and numerous things many other countries have done, and I think we need to do a lot more work into actually finding these solutions and finding what has worked for who, and then contextualizing it, because there's no point in having umbrella solutions. I think we've learned that taking stuff that worked in other places and bringing it here, copy-paste, doesn't always work. It needs to be contextualized. It needs to be put into the Namibian context so that it can actually provide a tangible solution for us. And yeah, like I said, the importance of startups. We really, really need startups, because currently, government's running out of money, number one. Number two, government's the largest employer. Number three, government's wage bill is a problem. So government is already, I would say, four, we have an unemployment problem. We have graduates on graduates on graduates on graduates looking for jobs day in, day out, and not finding anything. And the only way to improve that situation is if private enterprise can come in. And again, like I said, I don't want us importing businesses really there. It's unsustainable. Because tomorrow, if FNB says, you know what, we're cutting on the Namibian operations, then it's done, and they're gone. And we're left for dead. All those jobs gone, and unemployment up by another % or so. And I don't think I would like to have our fate in, foreigners' hands. So, yeah, it's my favorite slide. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Thank you to Quans and Roland, particularly for trusting me to give this presentation. Very funny actually. So Roland asked me to speak. He sent me a message like, would you mind speaking about startups? I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? I'm like, cool opportunity. And then I think last week, I got an email with the poster, and then it said main speaker. I'm like, no one said anything about main speaker. But yeah, I just want to say, once again, thank you for trusting me. It means a lot. And I think, thank you to GIZ for actually organizing this, this event, because it's very important. This is where the conversation gets started. And this is how we actually get to where we want to be. Someone has to start speaking about it. The problem needs to be addressed, and only then can we then find solutions and implement them successfully. So yeah, thank you.